Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. If you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. So, I know I do a lot of treasure stories. There's a lot of really fun, interesting lost treasures, buried treasures, lost mines, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that stuff originates out in the western US. So I'll try to be more conscious to make sure that I post some stuff here and there that are for my East Coast followers. So this one is one of those situations. This is about Thomas Beale's Virginia buried treasure vault. And this one originates in the early 1800s. And the story apparently originates around 1820 or so with a gentleman from Virginia. His name was Thomas Beale, and a group of his friends and fellow miners that had mined gold and silver from around the Colorado area and shipped it back to Virginia and buried it underground in a vault until they could come back for it. So they supposedly continued to mine and ship this precious metal back home, but they needed, a place to keep their treasure safe and hidden while they were still out in the West mining. And the details of this story are pretty interesting, and it's believed now that the story is probably most likely not true, but we don't really know for sure. So the story comes to us from an 1885 pamphlet that was produced called the Beale Papers. And it tells the story of Thomas J. Beale and a buried treasure in Bedford County, Virginia. So it's kind of in the western part of Virginia, I believe, in the mountains or the foothills. So this treasure was supposedly buried around 1820. So the pamphlet says that Beale was the leader of a group of about 30 gentlemen, all from Virginia, who went out west for adventure and buffalo hunting. And it is said this was in the early 1800s, and the area they were in was said to be north of Nueva Mexico, or New Mexico, and it was said to be north of the province or the area of Santa Fe de Nueva Mexico. So somewhere north of present-day Santa Fe, maybe currently in southern Colorado or far, far northern New Mexico, somewhere in that area. So while they were out hunting, they stumbled upon a rich gold and silver vein. And, they found this, I suppose, in the mountains. And they decided to go ahead and start to mine it, and I guess this vein ended up being pretty extensive. So these gentlemen put Thomas Beale in charge of transporting this gold and silver back to Virginia, and he was to bury it in a secret location. So obviously they wanted to stay out west. They wanted to mine as much as they could. They wanted to send it back home. They didn't want other people to intercept it. They wanted it buried in a particular secret spot to themselves, and when they were done mining, they would all retreat back to Virginia and be very rich men, I guess was the plan. So Beale supposedly made lots of trips back and forth to this hiding spot with all this gold and silver. And once done, he made these 3 cipher text or coded texts, which would give all the details to the location once uncoded. So these 3 texts had 3 different themes. One was to the specific location. One text was a description of what the treasure was, and one was the names of the treasure owners and relatives. And I believe in those orders. I think there was text 1, 2, 3. And those were the details. 1 is the location, 2 is the description, and 3 is the owners. So Beale then put these encoded cipher texts into an iron box in 1822 along with some other papers, and he locked the box. And he entrusted the box to an innkeeper in Lynchburg, Virginia, about 40 miles or so east of Bedford County. And this gentleman that was the innkeeper, his name was Robert Morris. So Beale told him not to open the box unless none of the men came for it in 10 years. So a few months later, Thomas Beale sent the innkeeper a letter from St. Louis, Missouri, stating that a friend would be mailing a key to that lockbox from St. Louis. And that key never arrived. So in 1845, the box was finally opened, and in it were found the 3 cipher text letters and a couple more plain text letters from Beale. So the ciphers were separated, like I mentioned, into letters 1, 2, and 3. I believe they were labeled that way. And Morris could not decipher these texts. So it was said that he hung on to him for many years, and that later on, a friend of Morris, he took a crack at it. And he used the Declaration of Independence as a key and was able to decipher the second text with the Declaration of Independence. So he could not solve the other two, and then it was said that he decided at that point, when he was in possession of all the documents, and it had been a lot of years, no one had been able to figure anything else out, he decided to sell a pamphlet with the story and all the ciphers in it. And this gentleman had one of his friends, I believe that was some kind of a publisher or a printer, and this gentleman had his friend publish this pamphlet, and this man's name was James B. Ward. So Ward published what was called the Beale Papers in 1885, and it sold for 50 cents, which was a bit expensive for the fact that there wasn't much to it. But researchers then tried to trace James Ward. They wanted to trace all these people and see if the people even really existed or whether this was just a big hoax. So researchers tried to trace James Ward, and they did find that a man by that name did own a house in the area. And this house was also recorded as the place that a Sarah Morris died in 1863 at age 77, and she was listed as the spouse of Robert Morris. So we're getting some of these people that are shown to exist in this area, the right names and situations. And Ward was also listed as becoming a master Freemason in 1863. So it seems some of these people in the story can be verified, but not necessarily Thomas Beale. In the 1820 census, though, they did find one person that could have been the Thomas Beale. There was a Captain Thomas Beale of the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 in Louisiana. And he was from Fincastle, Virginia, only about 20 miles away from Bedford County. So now many of the 1820 census lists from that time have been lost to time, or maybe, I don't know what happened to them, but there's a lot of them that don't exist. There's 18 counties in Virginia that they can't find the census list for 1820, and some of the surrounding states. So there's always a possibility that there could have been a Thomas Beale on one of those lists that no longer exist. But also, there is a Thomas Beale with the last name spelled slightly differently, that existed in 1820 in St. Louis, as he is on the customer list of the St. Louis Post Department in 1820. And R. Thomas Beale sent letters from St. Louis in 1822. So this could also potentially be him. Also, there was a Cheyenne Indian legend of large amounts of gold and silver being mined in the west and being sent east and buried in the mountains. And this Cheyenne story originated about 1820 or so. So there are some reasons like this that some people think the story is totally true. Now, you're probably wondering what the deciphered text says. And like I said, it was deciphered by using the Declaration of Independence as the key, and other famous documents were used to try to decode the other two, but there was no luck there. So I will read you what the deciphered text happens to say, and you can make a determination what your thoughts are. So, text 2 that has been deciphered by using the Declaration of Independence says, I have deposited in the county of Bedford, about 4 miles from Buford's, in an excavation or vault 6 feet below the surface of the ground, the following articles, belonging jointly to the parties whose names are given in number 3 herewith. The first deposit consisted of 1,014 pounds of gold and 3,812 of silver, deposited November 1819. The second was made December 1821 and consisted of 1,907 pounds of gold and 1,288 of silver, also jewels obtained in St. Louis in exchange to save transportation and valued at $13,000. The above is securely packed in iron pots with iron covers. The vault is roughly lined with stone, and the vessels rest on solid stone and are covered with others. Paper number 1 describes the exact locality of the vault, so that no difficulty will be had in finding it. So that is what the decoded text says. It gives you all the details of what is in the supposed burial vault. Now, there were quite a few spelling errors in the deciphered text, but it could still be fairly easily made out and translated. So the treasure's total weight, when people added it up, will weigh around 3 tons. And the gold is worth about $42 million and the silver around $1 million as of about 5 years ago. So now the big debate comes over the 2 remaining cipher texts. Many people believe they are hoaxes. And in the late 1960s, the supercomputers of the time were used, and they determined that the numbers in the uncoded text did not show the patterns that would be expected, and probably only encoded gibberish. Also, the ciphers exist in the Beale paper pamphlet, but no one had ever seen any originals. So cryptographers worked on them, and they thought that they weren't real. They also questioned why 3 separate texts would need to be written, and why would you write 3 and not have it all encoded in one? So they kind of questioned that. And they also thought that cipher 3, that was supposed to list the owners and their relatives. Now, if you remember, there was supposedly 30 people on this trip, so you would expect quite a few names and relatives. These cryptographers thought that cipher 3 seemed too short to list all the names of the people involved and, their relatives. So those were some things that made them think this, may not have been real or may have been a hoax. Also, Robert Morris, who was the innkeeper, was in fact running the Washington Hotel, but records from the time don't show him in that position until 1823. Although that's pretty darn close, so it could be possible that he may have been at the inn a year or two sooner, and if so, then all of that stuff does fall into place that the box could have been left with Robert Morris. So also they state that the 50-cent price of the pamphlet at the time, it was a pretty pricey pamphlet at the time. But of course they probably wanted to sell it to a lot of people that maybe wanted to find a lot of money worth of treasure. And it was also stated on the pamphlet that it was expected that there would be a wide circulation, so people needed to get their copy ASAP to try their luck. So it could appear that maybe it was a money-making scheme to sell a lot of these pamphlets and hopefully sell a lot of them quick so that people could have a crack at deciphering these encoded messages, which maybe weren't even real. So, one of the other curious details that does exist, though, is really perplexing. So in the decoded text, the words improvise and stampeding were also used, and they were not part of the English language in 1820. Or that might not have been in the encoded text. It may have been with the letter that was in the box. But anyhow, the words improvise and stampeding or stampede were used in one of the letters in the box. And so a lot of these cryptographers and English language specialists said, hey, these words didn't exist in the English language in 1820. But the curiosity part of this is that the word improvise is said that it was from French, and it was used from 1786 on, including in the New Orleans area. So while it may be unusual to have been in a normal English text at the time in 1820, it may not be unusual for someone to use this word that spent a lot of time in New Orleans around a lot of the French, like someone that had been in the Battle of New Orleans, like Captain Thomas Beale. So that's kind of a curious fact. But not only that, the text also mentioned the word stampede, which was a Spanish word that did not fully appear in the English language until around 1832. So this is just a few years after the ciphers were supposedly written, but this word also was common in New Orleans and in the Spanish territory of the western part of the U.S., where, this New Mexico or Colorado area would be that the mines supposedly were. So are these details proof that the ciphers are false? Because those words appeared and they generally appeared later in English language and are proof that the ciphers weren't real? Or are they proof that the ciphers are genuine because this Captain Thomas Beale, who supposedly wrote these ciphers, had in fact been in these areas where these words were common at the time before they made it into the American English lexicon? You can almost call it proof on either side. And that of course would be if this Captain Thomas Beale is the same Thomas Beale, which we don't know for sure. So cryptographers have also said that it seems somewhat possible that the writer of the pamphlet could also be the writer of the Beale letters, as there have been somewhat similar writing styles or a few correlations, but it seems some are in agreement here and some say it's hard to say that one way or another. So we may never know. But as of this day, I don't believe the Thomas Beale treasure vault has been found. And I think a lot of people have looked for it in Bedford County. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this. If you've heard about this story before, there seems to be some evidence on either side. So it could be one of those fantastic stories. Maybe at some point someone will find it, or maybe it was just a money-making scheme hoax to sell a whole bunch of these Beale papers and for that gentleman to make up a story and try to sell a lot of this pamphlet and make a lot of money. We may never know.